In this video, we are going to have a look at the absolute dramatic game played in round 3 of the Prague Chess Festival Masters. It's Praggnanandhaa playing with the white pieces against Richard Rapport, and some dramatic things are happening in this game as a result of very poor time management. Let me remind you that the time control in this game is 90 minutes for the first 40 moves. When the first 40 moves have been completed, the players will get an additional 30 minutes, and every move they also get a 30-second increment. I will guide you through the ins and outs and also give you some practical advices how to better manage your time situation on the clock. Now, let's have a look at this game. I just ask you to subscribe to the channel in the meantime, and here we go. Praggnanandhaa goes for the move 1d4. Knight f6, c4, g6. Knight c3, bishop g7. And we have the King's Indian opening, popular opening, timeless opening, has been played by Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov and many other great players, including Hikaru Nakamura. And Praggnanandhaa goes for the modern treatment of this opening by playing here the move h3. It's a useful move. You're taking away the g4 square from any of black's pieces, and there are some additional ideas. For instance, now after castling, the bishop can be developed to e3 without being bothered by a move like a knight g4, as the pawn on h3 is pretty useful. Here black has a wide variety of options. There are traditional King's Indian moves like e5 or c5, they can be considered. You can also develop your knight to d7 or even to a6, but Rapport goes for the most provocative move here in the position by developing the knight to c6, and he's preparing the move e7, e5 to put pressure against that pawn on d4. But the main drawback of going for this move knight c6 is that the knight can be challenged immediately with the move d5. Knight is under threat. The knight gotta go away, and it goes to e5. It's now nicely placed in the center, but not for long, because the knight is kicked back immediately with the move f4. White is playing super aggressively with all these pawn moves, and once again we see how important it is to have the pawn on h3 to control the g4 square so that the knight cannot come there. So the knight is forced to go back to d7. This has all been played before, and it looks like white is having a very nice pawn center. That's absolutely true, but at the same time, okay, black also has ideas to challenge the pawn on d5 with a move like c6 or even e6 anytime soon. Well, here Prag had definitely prepared it for this game, played still pretty fast. The move knight ge2, one of the various moves available, is one of the advantages of not developing the knight early to f3. The knight is coming to e2, and after the move c6, Prag decided to employ the knight on g3 so that it further strengthens the center. Looks like a very nice idea to overprotect the pawn on e4, and black has to make a plan here. How is he going to untangle? Because there's still pressure, lack of space. How to get all these pieces into the game? I think black should consider maybe to take on d5, and then after taking back, probably something like a6, preparing b5, hoping to get in b4 to put pressure against the knight on c3, but Rapport decided differently. He played the move knight e8. I'm not a fan of this move. I understand it does open the diagonal for the bishop, but look at this knight on e8. It's not a great piece at all. It's also obstructing the mobility of that rook, which cannot move now anytime soon. What should white do? Just continue developing. Bishop e2 was the first moment in the game where Prag was thinking. He played the move bishop e2. Now the move e6 is played. So you see that black is intending to maximize the pressure against the pawn on d5. And here, interestingly, Prag decides to release the tension by taking on e6. He could have considered taking the other pawn as well, but by taking on e6, you force black to take back with the f-pawn. Now you see that black has an extra pawn in the center, but still white has more space, obviously, but black is also missing that pawn on f7, which means that his king side becomes more vulnerable, and here Prag grabs his chance and start to launch an attack here with the move h4. Very nice idea. He's planning to go h5, but how is black going to meet that plan, because if h5 can be played, the h-file can be opened, but with the move bishop f6, black seems to be anticipating the advance of the h-pawn. h5 was not played here by Prag because the bishop is on its way to h4 to pin the knight on g3, and the bishop is well defended by the queen on d8. So this is a little bit annoying, and therefore Prag played a different move. He came up with a very interesting idea, as here he moved the bishop from e2 to d3. Now the situation has changed, because the bishop is now much better placed on d3, supporting the center, but also looking at these potential targets on the king side. And it should be clear that the pawn on h4, it's not a problem. You should not worry about that. White will proceed here with queen g4 to hit the bishop. And if black would take, for instance, then queen takes g3 for just one pawn, you have tremendous play. Open h-file, pressure on the g-file, the bishop on g3, on d3 will come alive with ideas to play e5 and hit the pawn on g6. So this is a dream position for white. Instead, black has to consolidate its position. With a move like knight g7, things are not that simple yet, but instead, Rapport played the move knight c5. He wants to trade off the knight for the bishop, but the bishop wants to stay on the board. Bishop c2, it's an excellent idea. Queen a5 was played, and here also Prag spent like 12 minutes on his next move, which comes as a surprise to me, as it seems to me that black is just ready to take on c3 very soon, and queen d2 is a very logical move to protect the knight one more time. I guess that Prag was thinking what the consequences are of a move like queen b4, hitting the pawn on c4, hitting the pawn on b2 as well, and it looks like you have to give up a pawn, but that's not a problem. Castling queenside was played in the game. Very nice idea, as your king is safe, now the rooks are connected, and okay, black can take the pawn on c4, congratulations, but the remaining pieces, they are still very passive, and now after the move h5, it is clear that black's kingside is under huge pressure. White is about to take on g6 and then probably get in the rook to h6. The other rook can come to the h-file. There are once again ideas based on the move like e5. I think black's position is very suspicious here. Even if black would go here for a move like bishop takes c3, which was not played in the game, after queen takes c3, the queens are coming off the board, but I think despite being a pawn down, the bishop pair is huge. There are even ideas to take on g6. The knight on e8 got to keep the pawn on d6 defended, and also the move e5 is a huge threat to undermine the support of the knight on c5, because the bishop is eyeing that knight on c5. So I think it's a really bad position for white, but this was not played in the game. Instead, Rapport didn't go for the exchange of dark squared bishop, but instead played the move b5. He's looking for counterplay with the move b4, but now it's white's turn first, and here Prag stands up with fantastic move e5. Very thematical positional pawn sacrifice in the King's Indian, or in many openings, because you're opening up the path for your bishop looking at the pawn on g6. Also the e4 square becomes quite a tempting square for instance, a knight. And okay, you're playing very ambitiously, hitting the bishop. So black basically has to take the pawn. And now bishop takes c5, also very nice move, trading off one of black's best pieces. Queen takes back. And now knight g2, e4, attacking the queen. The queen goes back to e7, and now it's knight takes f6, and you do take back with the queen. So what is happening in this position? As we can see, at this point, black is actually 2 pawns up. But it's a total mess. And more importantly, black's pieces, they are still out of play. And white is already really far advanced in the attacking process, having ideas to take on g6 anytime soon. But here, I think Prag made a very strange move, which is actually approved by the machine. He played a move g3 to keep the pawn on f4 supported, but it looks very strange to me. Frankly, I don't understand it. And I think much more natural continuation is to try to open up the king side. So for instance, if you take on e5, You keep the momentum, you're hitting the queen. And my assumption is that he didn't play this move f takes e5 as he didn't want to allow the exchange of queens. That's what I think, but I might be wrong. Imagine, if queens are coming off the board, the attack will come to an end. That's what a lot of people are thinking. But here, after taking on g6, then the attack is still very strong. Even when the queens are coming off the board, let's say queen takes d2, rook takes d2, pawn takes g6, bishop takes g6. Okay, now material is even once again. But more importantly, black's pieces are still really bad, and the rook will come over via the third rank, either to g3 or h3, with still a mating attack in progress. So I think Praggnanandhaa, who's usually a very good calculator, he just stick to its main weapons, like calculating, try to find a win here. But if you just look at the position, try to keep it simple. It will really help you to avoid these kind of time trouble situations. And let's see what happens after this move g3. E takes f4 was played by Rapport. H takes g6. And now f takes g3. I mean, it looks still very good for white, obviously. But why would you ever allow black to get a pawn on g3? I mean, probably black was hoping here that g takes h7 would have been played by white. Then the king can hide behind the pawn and the king is relatively safe. But instead, the move g7 was played. So Prag is trying to sacrifice the pawn and then take on h7 on the next move. That's the idea. So the bishop and the rook are hitting the pawn. But black is not obliged to take. Instead, rook f7 is much better practical defense. Rook takes h7 played. And now you see there are a lot of problems here with ideas even for white to get a rook over to h1 and then probably go rook h8 with a lot of mating ideas in the air. Black played here the move e5, trying to get finally its pieces into the game. If you do have time, then the bishop would like to come to g4 or maybe to f5. But here white simply played the move rook h8. Great move, it's a check. Black has to take the pawn on g7. And now just rook takes e8. White is a piece up. And black played here the move queen f4. But here at this point, Praggnanandhaa was getting lower on time. And he absolutely collapsed once again, like in his game with Magsoglu, the game I covered also on the channel. It's looking like a very easy position to play for white. The only thing you have to do is neutralize the opponent's counterplay. I mean, I said white is a knight up. Okay, black still has a couple of pawns, but if you do play bishop e4, it looks as if white is absolutely in control. The bishop alone is neutralizing black's 3 extra pawns, and the bishop on c8 is still pinned. So this looks just wonderful. Absolutely winning. However, look at this. Prag thought, okay, I'm going to bring my rook into the attack, and when my rooks are connected, I can play against the black king. But look what he missed here. Queen takes d2. King takes, only move of course, and now the rook comes in to f2 with check. And where should the king go to? All of a sudden, white is having a big problem, because if the king goes away to c1 to keep the bishop defended, well, there's rook takes c2. And black wins back the piece. After king takes, there's bishop f5 with a discovered check, and black is just winning in the endgame because he has a number of extra pawns. So here you see the problem. The king cannot go to d3 because of bishop f5. King d1 is met by bishop g4. All these moves there simply don't work. Also knight e2. You cannot block the check because of rook takes e2. It's this very same motive once again. King takes, bishop g4 with a discovered check, and on the next move you take the rook on e8. So the only move for white to stay in the game is king e3, but then after rook takes c2, all your efforts are in vain. You're 3 pawns down. This is a mental blow, really. I mean, objectively speaking, the position is still probably holdable for white if you start collecting the pawns. If you take on e5 and then try to wrap up the pawn on the g file, should probably just be holdable. But after blundering a piece, being low on time, it's very difficult to handle the situation. Prag played here the move rook h1 to h8. Now it looks as if he is in time to create threats against the king, pinning the bishop on c8 And one of the ideas is that if you do push the pawn, threatening to promote the pawn, well, there's rook to g8 and the rook is just in time. But let's get back. Can you see here the killer move for black? It's a remarkable shot, but now you understand that rook g8 is a very unpleasant move to face. You probably come to the conclusion that with the move bishop e6, you're able to break free. You're covering the square on g8, so there are no checks available. Rook takes a8 was played in the game, so it's a rook sacrifice. But now, after the move g2, it's time to resign because the pawn is going to promote with check. The pawn cannot be stopped by any of the rooks. If you do play the move knight e2, then there is just rook takes e2, and on the next move the g-pawn will promote. After the move g2, Praggnanandhaa resigned, and this is one of the most painful losses I've recently witnessed in top-level chess. Praggnanandhaa was just completely winning just only 4 or 5 moves ago. Then first he blundered the piece, then the position is still holdable, but after that he made a second huge blunder to lose for the second day in a row. After blundering against Magsoglu, Praggnanandhaa making 2 big blunders in one game. It's definitely not his tournament, but this all happened to many other great players in their warming up tournament prior to the candidates event. It's not easy for him, definitely not. But anyway, let me know in the comments, what do you think? What Praggnanandhaa could have done better? I think the time management was really not good. And if we go back to that critical moment on move 23, sometimes you should really sense that you don't have to calculate, but just improve your pieces, get all your pieces into the game. It's not time to calculate here. Just open the king side and the position actually plays for itself. Well, anyway, thanks for watching this game. And of course, do subscribe to the channel if you like this video.